I am 74 years old. I worked 42 years at the same machine shop in Knoxville, Tennessee. I never missed a shift. I never came in late. I never asked for an advance. My word was my word. That was the only thing my father had taught me that I never broke. 2 years ago, I owned a small house on Pinewood Road on the east side of Knoxville. It had been mine since 1981. I paid it off in 1998. The deed sat in a drawer in the kitchen for 26 years. Today I sleep in a single room at a residence for retired men in West Knoxville. $520 a month. A bed, a closet, a table, a sink. I share a bathroom with 3 other men. I share a kitchen with 7. AC. I did not lose my house because I drank. I did not lose my house because I gambled. I did not lose my house because I made a bad bet. I lost my house because of one signature I put on a piece of paper for my son in 2010. My name is Frank Calloway, and I came here to talk about this because I know there are a lot of men like me out there who are quietly making the same mistake right now and don't know it. I was born in 1952 in a holler in eastern Kentucky, in coal country. My father worked in the mines until they closed. My mother kept house and took in sewing. I was the oldest of 4. When my father lost his job, my grandfather sold a piece of bottomland so my father could move us to Tennessee and take a job at a machine shop in Knoxville. My grandfather did not ask for that bottomland back. He never said a word about it. He just did it. That was what family did. That was the lesson I grew up on. I started at the same machine shop my father worked at when I was 18, right out of high school. I stayed there until I retired at 62. 42 years on the floor, running lathes and milling machines. Plain work, plain pay, plain pride. I met Margaret at a church picnic in 1973. We were married for 46 years, until she passed in 2020. We bought the house on Pinewood Road in 1981. I was 29. Margaret was 27. It was a small ranch house, 3 bedrooms, brick on the front, vinyl siding around back. A garage I added myself in 1986 on weekends. We paid it off in 17 years. 17 years of mortgage payments. I was the kind of man who would rather skip lunch than be late on a payment. In 1978, before we even bought the house, our son David was born, our only one. We tried for another, but it never came. So David was everything. He was what we worked for. He was what that little ranch house was for. I watched that boy grow up in that house. I watched him take his first steps in the kitchen. I watched him ride his bike up and down Pinewood Road. I watched him work summers at the same shop where I worked, just to learn what real work felt like. I watched him graduate from the University of Tennessee, the first one in our family to finish a 4-year degree. It was September of 2010 when David came up from Atlanta on a Sunday and said he had found a place down there. He was 32 years old by then. He had been working at a tech startup in Atlanta for 4 years. He had been sharing apartments with friends. He wanted his own place finally. It was a 1-bedroom in Buckhead in Atlanta. $1,200 a month. For a man with a steady tech job, it was reasonable. He said this, "Dad, the property management company wants a co-signer. They only accept co-signers who own a paid-off home with a clean title." I looked at Margaret. She looked at me. We had talked about it before. We had always known David might need us for something one day. And when the day came, we said yes. That was a parent's yes. The kind my grandfather had given my father. The kind my father had given me when I needed help. It was just what you did. I remember the morning we drove down to Atlanta to sign. It was a Saturday in October. David picked us up from the parking lot of a Cracker Barrel near the property management office. We went up to the 3rd floor of an office building off Peachtree Road. A young woman in a blue suit met us in a small conference room. She was polite. She was fast. She put a folder in front of us, about 18 pages. She pointed at the lines where we had to sign with little yellow tabs. Did I read it? No. I will tell it straight because that is the truth. I did not read it. I was 58 years old. I had signed plenty of papers in my life for the shop, for the union, for the bank, for the truck, and I had never read a single one all the way through. I trusted. That was what I had been taught. I looked at the rent number, I looked at the term, which was 12 months, and I signed. Margaret signed too. We thought we were on the hook for 12 months, just 12 months. I came out of that office feeling like I had done right. I had helped my son. We took David to a Waffle House on Peachtree on the way home, and Margaret kept saying how proud she was that we could still help him. That is the last clear, good memory I have of the three of us together. I did not know what an automatic renewal clause was. I did not know what continuing guarantee language was. I did not know that buried in those 18 pages, on page 11, in print so small it was hard to read, there was a sentence that said the cosigner's obligation continued for as long as the tenant occupied the unit, including all renewals, modifications, and rent increases, and could only be released by formal surrender of possession. That Saturday morning, I did not walk out of that office signed up for 12 months. I walked out signed up for as long as David lived in that apartment. 13 years later, I would find out what that meant. The years went by. David stayed in Atlanta. He did well at the startup. The startup got bought out. He stayed on through the acquisition and got promoted. He bought a nicer car. He kept the apartment in Buckhead. He came up to Knoxville once or twice a year, mostly Christmas and Margaret's birthday in May. Nobody ever spoke about that lease again. I never heard from that property management company again. David never said anything about late rent, about renewals, about anything. To me, that thing had ended in 2011, when the year was up. I had put it out of my head the same way you put out of your head an old doctor's appointment. It was done. It was over. In 2020, in March, Margaret got sick. Pancreatic cancer. They gave us 4 months. We had 11 weeks. I was holding her hand at the hospital in Knoxville when she went. She was 66. We had been married for 46 years. David came up for the funeral. He stayed 2 weeks at the house. He helped me with the paperwork, the bank, the funeral home, the probate. He was a good son in those weeks. He went back to Atlanta. I stayed in Knoxville, in the house that had become too quiet. I was a widower at 68. I learned to make my own breakfast. I started going back to the same Baptist church Margaret and I had been members of for 40 years. I joined a coffee group of older men at the diner on Tuesday mornings. I went to high school football games on Friday nights. Life kept going. Slow, quiet, alone, but it kept going. In the fall of 2022, David came up for Thanksgiving and he was different, thinner, quieter. His clothes did not fit right. He had always been a put-together kind of man. That Thanksgiving, he was not. He told me he had been laid off from the company in Atlanta. He said it had been 6 months. He said he had been doing some consulting work, but it was thin. He said he was looking, but the tech market was bad. I asked him if he was all right on money. He said yes, that he had a buffer, that he was being careful. He said maybe he would need a hand later, but for now he was steady. I believed him. He was my son. He was 34 years old. He had a college degree. He had been working in tech for over a decade. I had no reason to doubt him. What I did not know that Thanksgiving was that David had been 3 months behind on the rent in Buckhead. In February of 2023, I got the first letter, a Wednesday afternoon. I was in the garage organizing my tools the way I did every winter when I heard the mail truck pull up. There was a certified letter, return receipt requested, addressed to me, from a law firm in Atlanta. I sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where David had done his homework. I put on my reading glasses. I opened it slowly, the way you open something that looks like it matters. It was a demand letter. It said that I, Frank Calloway, in my capacity as co-signer of the lease signed on October 23, 2010, for the apartment in Buckhead, owed $16,200. Past due rent, late fees, interest, and attorney's fees. I had 30 days. I read it 3 times. It did not add up. That lease was from 2010. I had signed it 13 years before. I was certain it was over. How could I owe $16,000 on something I thought ended in 2011? How could nobody have told me the lease was still active? And how could Margaret, who had been gone almost 3 years, still be on the demand letter? I called David that same day. He answered on the 3rd try. I read him the letter, line by line, standing in the kitchen with my reading glasses sliding down. He told me to take it easy. He told me it was a billing mistake by the management company. He told me he had been a few months behind, but he was working it out, that he was going to talk to the landlord directly, that I should not worry, that I should just throw the letter away. He said in 2 weeks it would be sorted. I did not throw it away, but I believed him. If you are listening to me right now, and you are around my age, especially if you are a man, I need to ask you something. Have you ever co-signed for your son or your daughter or one of your grandkids? Did you read that paper? Do you still remember exactly what was in it? If the answer is no, please stay until the end. What I am about to tell you is what I did not know when I got that letter, and I do not want you to find out the way I found out. If this is reaching you, please subscribe to the channel and leave a comment, even short. I read them. Knowing another man my age is listening is what makes me keep talking about this. I did not throw the letter away, but I also did not call a lawyer. In February of 2023, I trusted my son. I thought he would handle it. That was my mistake. In April, the 2nd letter came. It was not from the law firm this time. It was from the court in Atlanta. A summons served by a process server in plain clothes who knocked on my front door on a Tuesday morning. The owner of the apartment, a man named Robert Henley, had filed a civil suit against David, against me, and against Margaret. Margaret had been gone almost 3 years, but her name was on the summons because her name was on the lease. The debt was not $16,000 anymore. It was $26,400. In 2 months, it had gone up by $10,000. Past due rent, more late fees, more interest, additional attorney's fees, court costs. I called David. He did not answer. I called again. Nothing. I called 5 more times that afternoon. He called me back that night, almost 11. He said he could not pay right now. He said the consulting work had dried up. He said he would pay. Of course he would pay, but he needed time. He said I should hire an attorney to buy us some time. Hire an attorney. That was the moment on that phone call that I understood this was real. That was the moment I thought I should pull a copy of the lease and read it for real, 13 years later. I went to see Mr. Whitfield, the lawyer who had handled Margaret's estate. I brought him a copy of the lease, the demand letter, and the summons. He read in silence for 20 minutes. Then he set his glasses down and looked at me. He said this, "Mr. Calloway, the co-signer obligation in this lease runs for as long as your son occupies the unit. That is paragraph 9. You are going to be sued for every month of unpaid rent, plus late fees, plus interest, plus attorney's fees, plus court costs. And if your son does not pay, and from what you are telling me he is not going to pay, the creditor will come after your real estate." I asked him what coming after my real estate meant. He said, "The house on Pinewood Road, Mr. Calloway." I do not remember saying anything else in that meeting. I remember walking out to my truck. I remember sitting in the parking lot with the keys in the ignition for a long time before starting it. I remember driving home and looking at the front of the house, at the dogwood tree Margaret had planted in 1983, and saying out loud one sentence that stayed with me for months. This house can be taken from me. I tried everything. I tried to talk to Mr. Henley, the owner, on the phone. He was polite but firm. He told me he was 80 years old. He told me that rent had been part of his retirement. He told me he was sorry for my situation, but the problem was my son, not him. He had done his part by trusting the co-signer. I tried to talk to David. He started disappearing. He answered one call out of 5. He said he was going to fix it, that he had a new client, that in 2 months everything would settle. It was always 2 months. The 2 months never came. I sold my truck, a Ford F-150 from 2014, $11,000. I gave it all to Mr. Henley as a partial payment. The debt was already up to $38,000. $11,000 barely scratched it. I sold Margaret's wedding band, the one I had given her in 1973. I sold the pocket watch my father had passed down to me. I sold Margaret's mother's brooch, the one with 3 small pearls. I drove to a pawn shop on Kingston Pike and let them go. I got just under $2,000. I sat in the truck after and I cried, because for the first time in my life I had sold something Margaret had given me. In November of 2023, David disappeared. He stopped answering the phone. He stopped responding to texts. His whole social media went quiet. I drove down to Atlanta on a Saturday with a casserole Margaret used to make for him. He was not at the apartment anymore. He had stopped trying to pay, and Mr. Henley had moved his things out and put them in storage at his own cost. I drove back to Knoxville not knowing where my son was, at 72 years old, alone in a house that was being taken from me. In June of 2024, the judgment came down. The house on Pinewood Road was attached. Mr. Whitfield filed a motion. He raised the homestead exemption. He raised my age, my widowhood, my 42 years at the same job. The judge denied. He said that the homestead protection in Tennessee had a cap, and that for a cosigner obligation on a residential lease, the family home was reachable above that cap. The cap was small. The debt was not. I had never heard that in my life. I had always heard that a man's house was his castle, that nobody could take a man's house. I learned that was not exactly true. I learned there was a corner of the law where they could, and that I had walked right into that corner. Mr. Whitfield filed an appeal. The appellate court affirmed. He told me there was nothing more he could do without years and money I did not have. I told him to stop. In February of 2025, the sheriff's sale was scheduled. Mr. Whitfield called to tell me. He said, "Do not go." He said it would not change anything. I went anyway. It was a Wednesday morning, 10 o'clock, on the steps of the Knox County Courthouse downtown. I got there a half hour early. There were maybe 12 people, investors, real estate guys. I was the only old man there in a wool coat, hands in my pockets, standing by myself. The deputy called the lot. 3-bedroom single-family residence on the east side of Knoxville, 1,240 square feet, opening bid $85,000. It was over fast, 5 minutes. The house, which had been appraised at $190,000, sold for $126,000 to a real estate investor. After the debt was paid, the interest, the attorney's fees, the court cost, and the auctioneer's fee, what was left for me was $28,400. 44 years living there, $28,400. I had 60 days to vacate. That was when I understood the worst part of all this. I had thought the worst was the sale. I was wrong. The worst was the day I cleaned out the garage. I found on a high shelf I had not touched in 20 years my grandfather's old wooden tool chest, the same grandfather who had sold the bottomland for my father. I had carried that chest from Kentucky to Tennessee in 1975. I had not opened it in maybe 30 years. I sat down on the concrete floor of that garage with that chest beside me, and I understood that I had not just lost a house. I had lost 44 years. The house where my son had taken his first steps. The house where my wife had died. The house I had built that garage onto with my own hands. The house my grandfather would have been proud I bought. I had lost all of that for a 15-second signature on a Saturday morning in a Buckhead office building in 2010. Today I live in this men's residence, $520 a month. The $28,000 from the sale is in a savings account at the credit union. At this rate, it gives me about 2.5 years of room and basic costs. After that, I do not know yet. I will think about it when I get there. I get a small Social Security check from my 42 years at the shop. It pays for groceries, my blood pressure pills, and the bus fare. I do not have a truck anymore. I do not have a garage. I do not have my tools. I gave most of them away because there was no place to keep them. I do not go to the diner with the men anymore because it is across town and the bus takes an hour. I see the church on Sundays only, and I have not seen David in 9 months. The last time we spoke was last August, 4 months before the sale. He called from a number I did not know. He said he was working construction in Florida. He said he was sober. He said he was going to send me money soon. He said he was sorry. I told him I was all right. I told him I was getting by. That was a lie, but it was what I could say. When you are 74 and you are the kind of man I am, you do not tell your son on the phone that he cost you the house. I do not hate my son. That is the part that is hard to explain. I do not hate him. He is mine. He made a mistake that will follow him the rest of his life. I think he is paying for it in his own quiet way, somewhere far from here. But I cannot stop thinking every morning when I wake up in this room about the house I built. If you have stayed with me this long, I am asking you for one thing. If you co-signed any lease, any loan, any guarantee for your son or your daughter or one of your grandkids, go find that paper today, tonight. Read it carefully, with your reading glasses, with patience. Look for any language about continuing obligation, about automatic renewal, about co-signer release only by surrender of possession. If it is in there, talk to a lawyer, talk to the landlord. Try to formally exit in writing. And if anyone in your family asks you to co-sign something new, today or next week or next month, read it before. Read it at home. Do not trust anyone to read it for you. Not me, not them. Read it yourself, twice. And if there is anything in there you do not understand, do not sign. I am not here for pity. I am here so you do not go through what I went through. Don't make my mistake. Thank you for staying with me. If this has helped, send this video to a man around my age who maybe co-signed something a long time ago and never thought about it again. You may save his house. You may keep him out of a room like this one. I am Frank Calloway. This was the story of one signature on a Saturday morning in an office in Atlanta in 2010. May what I said here help somebody. That is what I came for.